Welcome back to our election special. It's the economy. I'm speaking with Niranjan, Rajadhyaksha, Rathin and Maitreesh Ghatak. All three very well-known economists and long-standing watchers of the Indian economy. Let me come to one issue which is so slippery that we don't have good numbers. Unemployment. Professor Ghatak, we have to rely on the NSSO number and just shades of it that the Business Standard managed to eke out. Do you think this is a big failure, not able to absorb the surplus labor from farms?
Yeah, no, clearly. I think that what's going on, and I think Niranjan made a couple of good points about some of the more alarming macroeconomic indicators, such as savings and the falling export demand. I think that the RBI's new monetary policy regime is a good one in terms of keeping inflation in check. But having said that, one shouldn't celebrate what also otherwise can be interpreted as signs of a recession as too much of an achievement. We know what happened in Britain with the Tory government's austerity, right? And then we know the backlash that comes. So some of the farmer distress and the fact that we have very little job creation in both the unorganized and the organized sectors, right? So these are all symptoms of an economy that is kind of sluggish. And for the poorest sections, clearly, that sluggishness actually is much more costly because they're much more at the margins of subsistence or a very, very poor quality of life. So yeah, I think come back to, I recently did a longish piece in this new magazine called the India Forum, where I looked at various sources on the employment and unemployment figures, and others have looked at it too. So I agree that the NSSO one is the most reliable one, but as you noted, it's unfortunate that right now, quality of statistics was one of the things that, as somebody who has spent more than 3 decades in kind of Western academia, was something we could really be proud of in any discussion, that the quality of Indian sort of statistics is considered to be very high. Now, the whole fact that we have this sort of GDP number revisions, which are going on almost like in a sort of, like when you fast forward a film, sort of it goes so fast that you don't even know what's really going on, right? And secondly, with any time something is not looking good, like the unemployment numbers, you have all this back and forth. And essentially things not being released. And also for me, as somebody whose primary work is on development economics and in a much more academic end of things, not the policy debates we are having here, poverty numbers since 2011-12, we don't have any updated poverty numbers. Now, is that a matter of priority? Is that a matter of our bureaucracy somehow not being able to cope up with some of the demands for economic management and governance? Anyway, coming back to your question, I think the NSSO, as well as things such as the CMIE database, right? Yeah. These are all... yeah, exactly. And also the Azim Premji University, they also have their studies. They're all pointing to a similar picture. And we are, I think, this unmistakable signs of a recession. And that is very hard to dodge.
Okay. Dr. Roy, I won't come to unemployment because I'm out of time. I want to get the other issue of fiscal deficit. The record looks good, definitely much better than the UPA record. Blessed, of course, because of lower crude prices. But do you think the current performance has left a lot in the plate for the future? Does that mar the record? I mean, every year now we have to have at least a minimum farm income transfer of 72,000 crores. I mean, that's gone if you probably want to build roads or railway tracks, and a number that really is not adding up. So do you think even if the fiscal deficit record is good so far, it has clearly spoiled the record for the incoming government, even if it is the same government, the same party?
The fiscal deficit, regrettably, does not fund infrastructure of the railways. 72% of the fiscal deficit is used to borrow for consumption. So in that circumstance, when you add on a future item of recurrent expenditure, such as farm waivers or whatever the other Congress thing is, I forget, minimum income guarantee, you are going to increase consumption expenditure. Let's get that straight. So it's not at the cost of... So it will either be at the cost of a higher fiscal deficit, which means less money for the private corporate sector to invest, because there's a finite pool of domestic savings, and as long as the government of India continues with its very desirable policy of not borrowing abroad, that pool is finite and may be under even further pressure, given what Niranjan was saying. So either we will have to make that sacrifice, or we will have to replace one form of revenue expenditure with another. So possibly if governments were able to do expenditure switching on subsidies or other forms of current expenditure, then the fiscal deficit would be affordable. Governments are perfectly entitled to decide to redistribute. But there is a problem. In India, when you decide to redistribute, it does not automatically follow that you can tax more and then redistribute. And therefore, you will have to spend less on something and redistribute, or borrow more. And that's a macroeconomic legacy of some concern for any incoming government.
Okay, fair point. One hopes, of course,
given the bipartisan agreement that transfers are now going to be an important part of public expenditure. The bipartisan agreement.
Yes. So it looks. Well, you're right. One hopes that at least in the years to come, GST will stabilize and the pie will grow. But I'm completely out of time. I want one round of rapid fire from all three of you, preferably monosyllabic answers or at least brief answers. Niranjan, what would you count as the success, economic success of the government, and what would you count as the failure of this government in terms of economic policy or economic numbers?
Okay, so the success is very clearly macroeconomic management, and it's not all because of crude and food. I think they have, even core inflation, which removes all this, has come down. So macroeconomic management, benign international situation, but nevertheless a positive. I'm less sort of impressed with the reforms. The reforms which have happened have all been inherited from the UPA, which is inflation targeting, GST, IBC, etc. Now they use political capital to push those reforms, so credit to them. But there's very little in terms of leaving behind a reform agenda, because in India every reform is a 10-year battle. So there is nothing in the future I see. So I think better on macroeconomic management, less on the more structural issues.
Okay. All right, Dr. Roy, I must request that it has to be brief. Success, failure.
Keeping petroleum taxes up when the middle class was screaming from their TV sets to cut them. Great success.
Yes.
Reason for prudent macroeconomic management. Failure, comprehensive failure to even think about reforming public institutions that have to deal with fiscal policy. A very, very important opportunity missed over 5 years.
Okay. We'll try and spend a whole show on that. That's a great point. Professor Ghatak?
Very quickly, I have already made critical remarks about where the performance has been disappointing. So let me try to point out a few areas where there has been some positive development. So one is something that Niranjan already mentioned, that the bankruptcy code reform, as well as inflation targeting and GST. These are all positive things, which, implementation issues aside, will something that we should acknowledge. And also certain public services, while writing this big survey on various aspects of the economy, whether it's Jan Dhan or rural house construction and some other measures, there has been, again, the exaggerations and claims always. It's unfortunate, because even if you let the stats just play out and be verified by independent other organizations, right, there has been positive development. But the rest, unemployment, growth, in terms of livelihood of the poor, agricultural crisis, exports, I really don't see a very good report card here.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me in this conversation. This is the first of our election series, and the scoring by our experts is very clear. Middling or lower than middling performance as far as growth is concerned. Good performance as far as macros in terms of inflation control and current account deficit are concerned, external sector. But very poor performance as far as pushing the reforms agenda and tackling human problems, unemployment, the farm crisis. There the record is absolutely poor, according to our experts. Thanks for watching this special show. There is many more to follow. Now, election analysis, it's the economy.